Hello, and welcome to Virtual Investor Conferences. My name is Matt Lateplo, and on behalf of OTC Markets, we're very pleased you have joined us for our next live presentation from Barksdale Resources Corp, a North American base metal exploration company focused on copper, zinc, lead, silver, and gold. Please note you can submit questions in the box to the left of the slides. You can also view company's availability for one-on-one meetings through the Schedule Meetings tab found on the conference platform. At this point, I am very pleased to welcome Rick Trotman, President and CEO of Barksdale Resources Corp., which trades on the OTCQX Best Market under the symbol BRKCF and on the TSXV under the symbol BRO. Welcome, Rick.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for that warm introduction. I appreciate you folks having me on this platform. It's great to be here. So today I'd like to walk everyone through Barksdale Resources investment opportunity. We are, as Matt mentioned, a base metal exploration company focused primarily in the desert southwest of North America. So that would be the states of Arizona in the United States and northern Mexico in Sonora. In today's discussion, I'll be making some forward-looking statements. Feel free to read this slide at your leisure. You can find this on our website, which is barksdaleresources.com. Once you're on that site, you can also look for project-specific information. And more importantly, if you have any questions for management, you can send those directly to us or even book a meeting with myself or Terry Ann Willicke, our VP of Communications. So why Barksdale? You're seeing a lot of companies today in this investor forum. Why should we stand out? Why should you remember who we are? Well, in short, we have a spectacular project. Our Arizona property, specifically our Sunnyside property, which is in the Patagonia district, is one of these projects that only comes around every so often. We sit immediately adjacent to a world-class mineral system that's being developed by a major mining company. We effectively share an ore body. And as you see here, the historic holes from our side of the fence suggest that ore body continues onto our property. So we're very close to something very special, and quite honestly, we will end up having a piece of that very special deposit on our ground. Now, how big that piece is something that we plan to investigate through drilling the property, which should start here in a couple of weeks. In addition to that property, we have others in the district, which we'll talk about shortly when I show you a plan map. And then to the south in Mexico, we have another property called San Javier, which is a oxide copper deposit that we're currently completing a preliminary economic assessment on. It has a oxide resource all near surface, and we should have the results of that PEA out probably in the next month or two. We've actually expanded that PEA to be a little bit more all-encompassing, so some exciting stuff in the works there. So if I move forward within the deck, before I jump into the project specifically, I'll just give you a bit of background on Barksdale from a corporate financing and ownership standpoint. So starting on the right-hand side of the slide, we have roughly 81 million shares outstanding, around 7 million options outstanding, and nearly 7 million warrants. That gives us a market cap of roughly 48 million market cap Canadian, and we have a cash balance of just under $4 million. This is enough for us to get working at Sunnyside once we start drilling. In addition to some of the warrant money that is out there, we should be able to drill for a decent amount of time before having to go to market. And what really sets Barksdale apart from other junior exploration companies of our size is the ownership structure. So we're a very tight story. We have roughly 25% corporate interest in our stock, and that includes a roughly 10% interest held by Teck Resources, which is a major diversified mining company. Osisko Development Corp also has a decent sized chunk of our company. On the institutional investor side, we have some very important and very stable long-term funds that own roughly a quarter of our stock. Those include Crescat Capital out of the United States, US Global out of the United States, a couple of Canadian funds, and then we have a growing presence in Europe as well. Also to note is we have roughly 20% of our stock in the hands of high net worth individuals, including Eric Sprott up in Canada, who's a very notorious kind of mining billionaire investor, as well as a very high net worth individual in Peru who is kind of in the family business of mining. And then finally, the insiders here have a little over 5%, and we've actually been exercising options and keeping those options here recently, so kind of growing our ownership percentage. Moving forward, to just give you a bit of 12-month history here on the stock price, as you can see, we had quite the rise between the roughly a year ago up until about 2 months ago. We went from roughly 40 cents to 95 cents. That's a testament to our very tight shareholder base and the limited amount of float that we have in the company. So this effectively shows you the progression as we got closer and closer to receiving our permits, which we did earlier this year. We had a lawsuit lodged against the U.S. Forest Service, roughly where the stock kind of falls in June, and it's kind of settled into that 60-cent price range. And we'll talk about some of the reasons behind all of this here shortly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the actual management of the company, but please feel confident that we have a team that has decades of experience in doing what they are specialists in, whether that be exploration, project development, et cetera, et cetera. I myself am a geologist by background, but I've spent a considerable amount of time in both private equity research, and now I'm on the corporate side. So inch deep and a mile wide, as they would say. All right, so getting into the projects. As I mentioned before, we have two key project areas. The first is the San Javier copper oxide resource, which is in Sonora, Mexico. You'll see that in the bottom right-hand side of the slide. As I mentioned, we have a PEA, a preliminary economic assessment, currently underway. We had the preliminary numbers back from that. We are now bolting on a run-of-mine stream of ore into that design. So it's taking a little bit longer than we originally expected, but we think ultimately the product that we deliver to the market will be better than we originally expected. So that should come out here in the next month or two. But the center of the slide is really what the focus of the company will be from here on out, and that's the Patagonia district in Arizona. So this is where we have received our initial permits from the U.S. Forest Service to drill what we consider to be a world-class asset. We should start drilling that in September of this year, on the 15th to be specific. And that all is, of course, pending the current litigation that's going on right now with the U.S. Forest Service. As most of the shareholders that are on this call will know, the U.S. Forest Service was challenged on issuing our permits. The injunction hearing is actually going on today. So today is a pretty big day for us. And we feel quite confident that we will prevail in that injunction hearing. We'll have the injunction shot down, and that we will indeed start drilling here shortly. So to zoom in a bit more on that Patagonia district, where we have a collection of properties, you'll see a couple of different colors here. The dark blue being the properties that we control, either 100% or through option agreements. So you'll see the top two here, the Goat Canyon and Canelo. We picked these up from Rio Tinto Resources. The bottom one, San Antonio, we acquired that from Tech Resources. And then in the center of the diagram is the Sunnyside asset, and that's our flagship property. We hold that under an option with a company called Regal Resources. They're a delisted but public company. They recently brought in Donald McKennis from the Oxygen Group to kind of join their board and ultimately become their chairman. So we're positively disposed there. Things seem to be kind of trending in the right direction with that company, who's been kind of halted for a number of years. So glad to see that the corporate governance is coming back into play there. But we have this property through an option agreement where we can earn in. And the key thing of this district, if you will note, there's a light gray color property package that sits kind of in between all of our properties. And those are the properties held by South 32. They're a multi-billion-dollar diversified mining company out of Australia. They recently have come out with a $1.7 billion capital project to build a world-class asset called the Taylor deposit on the Hermosa property. And that is special because if I zoom in, you'll see the footprint of that deposit immediately adjacent to our property. So again, our property is in blue. That dark gray color that kind of extrudes from the right-hand side of our property boundary, that's the footprint of that world-class asset projected to surface. You'll note that there are several dark dots and lines on the presentation slide. Those are drill holes that were actually drilled on our side of the property in the 1980s. They were effectively the discovery drill holes for the deposit next door. And if you look on the bottom left-hand side, you'll see some of the assays that come out of those holes, and they're quite spectacular. I mean, 17 meters of 17% lead zinc with 1.3% copper and over 10 ounces per ton silver. That is very valuable rock. That type of grade is, it is multiples of the grade that is going to be mined next door. And it's very indicative of this kind of high grade core of the deposit. It gives us lots of hope that we have not only very high grades, but that we can continue building very, very high, very desirable tons next door to what is effectively a development stage project. They started sinking their shafts, which are located effectively over the word Taylor on this slide here recently. So the construction there is effectively underway. Now, what we're looking to do when we can start drilling here in a couple of weeks, which will be September 15th, is when we'll start all of our mobilization process, is drilling this high priority area that you see in this lighter color blue. This effectively allows us to test the targets that are between the property boundary and this orange blob that you see called the Sunnyside porphyry. Now, this is the kind of heat source that caused the formation of all of the mineralization that extends off to the right-hand side of this slide. And so this roughly 1 kilometer gap between the edge of that porphyry and the property boundary is where we have the highest potential to build a significant resource with high grades that can ultimately become very valuable to the mining operation that's being established next door. So again, we plan on starting that drilling program in mid-September once we have kind of passed this voluntary drill moratorium timeline that we put in place. So to give you a bit better of a sense of how this looks in 3 dimensions, this is effectively a cross-section across both properties. You'll notice a light blue line right down the center of the slide. That's the property boundary. The right-hand side of that slide is the South 32 property. The left-hand side is our Sunnyside property. Now you'll note this very large blue body on the left-hand side. That's the Sunnyside porphyry. It's a very, very large body. It's likely a series of nested porphyries. But nevertheless, you do get some pretty long continuous intervals of decently graded copper. But the really important thing to note here is that it was the heat source that caused the formation of mineralization that extends off to the east. And so that mineralization is shown in this red color. These are kind of the generalized ore bodies of what's sitting next door. Now, this deposit next door is going to be mined via underground methods. So there's going to be 2 shafts that come down through the word Taylor and South 32. And you'll note that we're just a couple 100 meters away. Now, our drill holes that were drilled in the 80s, you can see here as well, including some of those really high-grade intercepts that we have. So basically what we're looking to do is continue the exploration, pushing the results to the to the west towards that porphyry copper deposit to see exactly how much of this world-class asset sits on our side of the property. Now, this is a 3-dimensional type of situation. So not only do you have that kilometer scale east-west gap, but it also the potential wraps around the porphyry itself. So wherever you have the appropriate host rocks, which tend to be carbonate style rocks, you have the potential to build these high grade resources. And so that's what we're going to be doing once we start drilling in September. Now, just to give you a sense for what's actually going on the ground, this slide gives you an aerial view of the Sunnyside and Hermosa properties from 2018. So this is the date when South 32 acquired Arizona Mining for $2.1 billion in cash. That's Canadian dollars. The project was undergoing some earthworks for kind of early stage development. And you can see some of the drill holes that we have just immediately next door. And this entire ore body would kind of plunge towards your feet in an underground capacity. Now, fast forward 5 years, and this shows you kind of the advancement that's been completed here. They've had, well over 10 drill rigs turning for 5 years. They've put hundreds of millions of dollars into this project, putting in an underground, building all sorts of infrastructure, finishing a dry stack tailings facility, drilling a water well field, and a water treatment plant. And soon they will be turning on that water system to start dewatering the underground so their shafts can advance in the dry. So all in all, there's a $1.7 billion development capital going forward. The company has announced that they're going to make a construction decision on that this year, but have already started some of the preliminary works that are included within that capital budget. So it's great to see this mine advancing immediately next door. I'll note that we are actually standing on our property looking at theirs, so this fence is literally the property boundary. And if I go back one slide, this dot at the bottom of the slide is where that next photo is actually taken from. So it kind of shows you how it's gone from an actual hillside with nothing on it to kind of a flattened off piece of property with multiple underground adits on the left-hand side of the slide next to that kind of temporary truck shop. So lots of things going on here. We have a world-class asset sitting adjacent to our property. We share the resource. Our key question is, how much of it do we have? And so once we start drilling here in the next couple of weeks, we'll start to be able to answer some of those questions, which our very loyal and supportive shareholders have been just tuned in to find out those answers for the past couple of years. So it's quite exciting. This is, what we've been waiting for, and we're very excited to get turning here soon. So this is probably the most important slide in the whole deck. If you have more information, or if you would like more information, please reach out to Terry Ann Willicke. She's our VP of Communications. She can get all of your questions answered. She can also set up meetings with myself or her where we can just Zoom and get anything answered that you may have. Again, that website is barksdaleresource.com. And for those interested in investing in our story, you can find us on the OTCQX under the symbol BRKCF, as well as on the TSX Venture Exchange under the symbol BRO. All right, so that concludes my remarks for today, and we will move on to the Q&A. Just bear with me 1 second while I start reading through some of these questions, and I'll read them off to you. Okay, so the first question is, when will you know the results of the injunction hearing? So as I mentioned earlier, our court date for oral arguments is actually today. That's in the Tucson Federal Court. And what is being discussed is whether or not an injunction will be granted that prevents us from drilling while this lawsuit against the Forest Service goes on. Now, we've tied ourselves to this litigation. We have intervener status, and so our counsel is assisting the Department of Justice in all of these arguments, so that way we're adequately represented. The oral arguments from both ourselves, the Department of Justice, South 32 is also one of their projects is wrapped up into this lawsuit. Their permits are being challenged as well. We'll all make our arguments today, as will the plaintiff. Now, the judge has agreed to try to give her judgment before the September 15th drilling date. So we voluntarily agreed to delay drilling until September 15th, so to provide enough time for this injunction hearing to occur. We obviously were able to schedule that a bit earlier than the 15th, so this being August 24th. So between now and the 15th, we are likely to get the ruling from the judge. Now, that being said, it could take, a month or two. It just depends on the actual judge's kind of calendar and docket and what she has on her plate. So she'll endeavor to give us an answer before then, but I will say that come September 15th, our voluntary deadline for kind of not drilling expires, and we can start drilling at that point. So we will drill at the earlier of the judge's positive decision in our favor or September 15th, whichever comes first. I hope that gives a bit more color without going into too much down the rabbit hole. All right, next question. Let's see here. Can you describe the preliminary injunction process in detail? I think we just kind of walked through that, so I'll consider that one answered. The oral arguments are scheduled for today. How will it continue? So basically, once we give the oral arguments today, the judge has all the information that she needs to make her decision on the injunction. So the plaintiffs filed their motions. We responded to those motions, and then they provided a response to our response. So within those sets of documents, there was a lot of information passed along, lots of legal precedent. And so the judge has not only all of that information, but then the oral arguments that we make. And our arguments are effectively that the U.S. Forest Service followed their procedures, they followed the science, and that all of the outcomes are completely rational. The plaintiffs are basically arguing that the Forest Service's analysis comes up short. And so in my view and our lawyer's view, the odds of this case, and I have to be careful how I say all of this stuff, so don't view this as me kind of waffling here. This is me making sure that I don't put my foot in my mouth with my lawyers. We are very confident in our case, and we believe that the plaintiffs' arguments have no merit. So we are very confident that the ruling will go in our favor. Because after all, we're using mostly existing roads, we're drilling on mostly existing drill pads, and the project has been drilled in the past. So most of the arguments that are made by the plaintiffs just don't make a lot of scientific sense. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Let's see here. Here's one that says, I have been following your company for a while now. I may be wrong, but I thought I had read that South 32 may have run into a challenge recently regarding metallurgy or something like that, of that nature. Correct me if I'm wrong. Thanks. To my knowledge, they haven't run into any issues on metallurgy within the Taylor deposit, which is a sulfide deposit. I know back in the day, Arizona Mining, who was the exploration company that was acquired by South 32, they had some early issues with manganese that reported to the concentrates, and that I think was mostly dealt with. So the manganese is elevated on the eastern side of the deposit, especially in the oxide resources. And so once you get into the sulfides, the clean sulfides, those manganese issues are abated, and can, quite honestly, even if the manganese is higher, can be dealt with through mixing of various concentrates. So I don't think there's any issues there. And I can't comment on their electrolytic manganese, the Clark deposit, which they're looking as kind of like a battery grade electrolytic manganese deposit, a separate development project. I can't comment there because I haven't seen enough information come out on that. Next question, did South 32 receive Fast 41 status for Hermosa, and will Sunnyside be able to also be eligible. Yes, indeed, South 32 did receive Fast 41 status. I think they're the first mining project in the U.S. to actually get that designation. I think they'll be filing their plan of operations here imminently, maybe this week even. And so that's great. It allows them to move through the permitting process for the larger expanded project. So it should hopefully cut back on the amount of time in permitting. And so to be clear, they have patented mining claims where they can permit the initial development, the initial project through the state of Arizona, and they don't have to incorporate any federal approvals into that process. Now, that Fast 41 is for the expanded project. So, 8, 9, 10 years from now, when they need to expand the footprint, let me step back. 8, 9, 10 years into the operation, they'll ultimately need to expand the footprint onto the federal ground, and they'll need a permit to do that, whether it's for waste dumps, tailings facilities, infrastructure, what have you. They'll have to go onto the federal ground, and they'll need a permit for that. So that's what the Fast 41 is going after. And to answer the second part, will Sunnyside be also eligible? I would assume so, but look, we're in the early stage of exploration, so that's a question that should be answered many years from now once we find out exactly how big of a deposit and what the quality is that we ultimately end up finding. Let's see here. The next question also related to the injunction. Should the injunction hearing go against us? What is the next step? Appeal it, move on to the next property? Thanks. Okay, so if the injunction goes against us, which I think is a very low probability of occurring, what would happen is we could appeal that injunction decision, which I don't think would bear fruit, but we'd ultimately end up going through the actual court process. So the injunction is just one piece of this court case, which will take 12 to 16 months to play out. So if the injunction goes against us, we'll basically have to wait until the court case plays out before we can start drilling. And so that's not a great outcome. We don't expect that to happen, but that's what would occur if the judge does rule against us on the injunction and does put that injunction in place, just to be perfectly honest with you. Let's see if there's any other questions in here. I think the rest of the questions have already been answered. They're kind of multiples of the same thing. All right, so I think that's the end of questions. So again, thank you for your time. I'll just leave you with my last couple of words, which are, we're looking to embark on a very exciting phase here. We're going to start drilling a project we've been working on permits for 4.5 years. So the next couple of weeks are going to be probably the most exciting in the company's history. We can't wait to get the drill bit turning, and we can't express our gratitude enough for those shareholders that have been following us for a long time and have been just a constant and consistent source of support for us. So thank you very much. Again, we are Barksdale Resources, BRKCF on the OTCQX, and BRO